All right, welcome in to another episode of Carps Corner, the Bobby Carpenter Show, coming to you here Friday before the Penn State Northwestern game. Look at Northwestern thinking, okay, should be worried about Ohio State, 38-point favorites. It's in Evanston. Weather might be an issue a little bit. Grass field could be a little sloppy, rain, some wind. And Northwestern obviously isn't a great team. Lost to Iowa last week, 33-13, gave up over 400 yards to the Iowa offense. And if you're an Ohio State fan, you remember that Iowa offense against Ohio State, how they ultimately looked. They didn't look very good. They had a hard time moving the football, and Northwestern allowed them to gain 400 yards and score 33 points when they struggled mightily against the Bucks. So obviously, it shouldn't be too much of a test. So there's a couple things we need to look for here. What are some of the ultimate, the keys to the game? How's that going to play into this? So there's some players that we could ultimately watch and see what they could do in this game. Have some and what will be indicators moving forward, because I think that's really what we're looking at here. And this is kind of where we are. Ohio State has Northwestern, they have Indiana, and they have Maryland before the final showdown after Thanksgiving with Michigan. And so as we watch these games, and this is the problem, you can't really enjoy them as much anymore because you have to watch them with a critical eye thinking, okay, how would that look against Michigan? We're struggling to run the ball. Maybe we'll run the ball better, but could we run it against Georgia? Tennessee looks really good. Could we keep up scoring with them? And those are all the questions that you ask yourself each and every game when you're watching Ohio State play these opponents that you would define as subpar. At least that's how I'm looking at it. And so I lose a little enjoyment of the fan. Now, I still enjoy going there, seeing the guys, talking to them, making sure that they understand you appreciate every win. It's hard to win. And if you can win by, double digits, great. Two scores, awesome. You win by 21, 35, whatever. You get to enjoy that. So savor that. But still, you want to play a clean game. And you should always, and Ryan Day talks about this a lot, you're comparing yourself not against your opponent, but against your future self. And so that's a big piece of ultimately these evaluations for these games is, hey, you know what? They're a good team, or not a good team, but against good teams, how will that ultimately impact us? What will we be able to do? How is that going to look? So that's something that they're going to have to be locked in on. That's something they're going to have to be focused on, looking forward, looking at, and making sure they understand, hey, when we play good teams, can we get away with this stuff? Because Northwestern this year, they're not a good team. They beat Nebraska to start the season, and since then, they have not been good. Before we get going too much further than that, I want to get some sound. We'll listen to some of the stuff Ryan Day talked about, some of the things that happened before Penn State, and then some of the guys getting healthy, and then ultimately Ryan wanted to talk about the weather as well. So we're going to start off with the end of half situation, how that ultimately looked. Obviously it wasn't great. Penn State, you're down there, you get a chance to get a for sure 3, most likely. Hoping to get 7. The one thing you can't do is take a sack, and CJ takes a sack and ultimately gets stripped on it. Luckily, it doesn't go from bad to worse, but you get no points at the end of the game. Here's what Ryan had to say about that.
Yeah, not exactly the way that we saw it play out right before that. No, that was not good. 6 seconds left. Thought we'd take a quick shot into the end zone. Didn't quite play out that way. And, after the game, I said, CJ, I shouldn't have put you in that situation. Right. Here's kind of our thought process. And so lesson learned on both ends.
And Ryan acknowledged, shouldn't have put CJ in that situation. Wasn't great for him to do. CJ's got to be more aware of it, though. He's got to be able to see the pressure coming off the edge. And frankly, they confused me. Player was showing off the edge. I talked about it a couple shows ago. Thought he would bail out to double on Marvin. He ultimately comes. They don't pick him up. CJ has to be aware of that. To be able to get the ball out there, because worst case, you just ultimately throw it away and you move forward and you get out of there, and it's not the biggest deal in the world. One of the other things that was good to see was Jordan Hancock has been back out there, and he provides some length, some athleticism, and another body at corner. And here's what Ryan had to say ultimately about Jordan.
Great seeing him. Yeah, great seeing him out there. He's getting his feet underneath him, getting back into football shape. But, you can see his ability to make plays, drive on balls, ball skills, feel for the game, and great to see him back on the field.
So Ryan touched on there, adding some skill, obviously, to the defense, which is good. He has that length. He's been practicing well. It's good to see him out there making some plays, and it's good to see him on the field. He's got a little bit of ways to go. It's continue to get better, but he's going to have to play a good game against Maryland. They've got some nice wideouts, but you're going to need your full complement of defensive backs. You're going to need Denzel Burke playing well. You're going to need Cam Brown back and playing well. Jaylen Brown back, make sure he's playing well. J.K. Johnson, who missed a big tackle that led to one of the touchdowns in the open field. You want him to be back. And so all of these guys, you want to have all 5 of them. They've got 5 guys, I think, that can play corner. And you want your veterans back, but you also need the young guys to be locked in and ready to go. And one more thing Ryan said is, before we kind of wrap up Penn State a little bit, as he said some of this stuff in the radio show on Thursday, dealing with a little bit of the adversity and some of the stuff that came ultimately, in that Penn State game, and what Penn State could bring, and what they were able to do.
Yeah, well, I think when you're playing against better in competition, these things show up more and more. And it's something that we've talked about week in and week out, is that the issues are always going to be on the film. When you go against better competition, they just come to the forefront. You get exposed a little bit more. But this film was a great film to watch. 80 plays against a really good offense, and you're able to learn a lot from that, where maybe you were able to get away with it a couple of weeks ago. You're not going to be able to get away with that now. So a lot of learning and a lot to grow from this film.
Ryan understands, Penn State was a pretty good team. They're able to do some things that some of the other opponents may not be able to do, and that's why it was a good test. And, I know he's happy winning by 13. Would have loved to have had that been a little larger number, but was able to get the job done. And you dealt with some of that stuff. You bounced back. Penn State was able to do some good things. So you're able to handle everything they gave you, handle that adversity, and kind of flip the script and ultimately get it going. And so now looking forward to some of the stuff about Northwestern. And one of the issues, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be some weather. There's going to be rain, maybe before, maybe during. Going to be a wind gusts off the lake. Ryan Field can get incredibly windy. It's Evanston, obviously. It's up in northern Chicago, not far from the water. Their campus sits right on the water, so that wind can whip off of the lake. And there's reportedly going to be gusts, somewhere between 30, possibly 40 miles an hour, but a pretty steady wind. So we saw CJ throw the ball in the wind earlier against Michigan State. But Ryan, talk about preparing for the weather and everything that goes into that.
What we like to do is we try not to look at the weather too far in advance, and then as we get to about 2 or 3 days out, then we start to look at it, because in the Midwest, for whatever reason, if it shows something on Saturday early in the week, it's usually not that by the time you get to Saturday. But this week it looks like we are going to get some weather, so we practice in all the elements, and so we're ready for it. We've had some really windy days in practice in the rain, so we'll just, do the best we can to understand what we're up against. And sometimes, you don't really have to make many adjustments. You have to handle it better than your opponent. Other times, if it gets extreme, you have to make some adjustments. So we'll talk about it as we get closer to the game.
So you get your weather reports. And anybody here that's lived in the Midwest, the state of Ohio, Illinois is not all that different. Weather can change dramatically. So you get your report on Monday. You have an idea, you start prepping for it, but you don't necessarily want to go all in on it because it could ultimately change. And so you don't want to dramatically alter your game plan. But it looks like what was reported on Monday is going to factually happen. Maybe there's a hard turn before game time, but it looks like this is going to be the case. But the thing is, as I mentioned, the rain and the wind, it's a grass field. And, Pat Fitzgerald made a joke in his presser about, the grass. They've been watering it every day. It's, 4 feet high or whatever. It's like hay out there. But it is a grass field. And so when it gets wet, it's one of the softer fields in the Big Ten. And talking with some of the guys today, it's a screw-in cleat game. You get the longer screw-ins. You've got to dig in on that field. It's going to be soft. It'll give. And Northwestern's used to playing on it. Ohio State plays on a lot of turf. There's only a handful of teams that have grass, I believe. Michigan State, maybe Penn State are the 2 teams in the East that have it. And Penn State's grass is really nice. They do a really good job with it. But preparing on grass, it's a much different feel of a surface for when you're rushing the passer, when you're coming out of your cuts as a running back or a receiver, linebackers changing direction, defensive backs having to kind of settle in and drive on the football. all of those things are going to be impacted. And so it's hard to get that elite rush sometimes as a pass rusher, which is something that's going to be pretty critical, in this game, as you ultimately, want to get after Helinski up there and whoever potentially could have in at quarterback. Some more notes here about it. You look at average score. I mean, Northwestern, they're scoring about 18 points a game. They're giving up 29. They're rushing for 113 yards a game. They're giving up 186. And so they're able to run the football. And this has been the methodology for Northwestern to win for a long time. Really solid defense. Don't take a ton of risks. Force you to drive the field on them. They'll blitz from time to time. They'll do some stuff when they need to get aggressive, but it'll be spot shots. They don't turn the football over on offense. They run the ball well. They'll dink and dunk down the field and occasionally take a shot. And that's kind of how they've won. It's a very like Jim Tressel-esque kind of approach. Same thing kind of PJ Fleck does at Minnesota. But they understand that they just can't out-athlete guys. They can recruit them. They can develop them. And that's why Patrick Fitzgerald has had some success intermittently, like getting to Big Ten championships. To sustain, it's really hard and very difficult. But they need to be efficient with how they play, and they cannot expose their defense, which is usually pretty good, a lot. Well, the problem is this year, they don't necessarily have a running game that's been great. Helinski, their quarterback, has been average, and usually they have a guy like Trevor Siemian that's a good game manager. He's got guys back there that aren't going to turn the football over. They can make some of those intermediate throws and short throws with timing and accuracy. Helinski hasn't been that. He hasn't been that good. The guy you do need to look out for on that offense, like I said, they're running the football better than they're throwing it, but they're still not running it great, is Evan Hall. The 5'11", 210-pound, believe he's a senior, maybe a junior. He's got almost 580 yards on the ground, rushed for over 1,000 yards last year. He's a pretty good player. He's tough. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he has good thickness. He's got a little bit of wiggle, and he can break through and pull through on some tackles. Looked pretty darn good against Nebraska. Had a good game, I believe, against Maryland. Iowa shut their run game down, as you can imagine, because no one runs the football on Iowa. So he's a guy to watch. And now the next guy, I'm going to butcher his name, but he's a very, very talented defensive lineman. And I don't even know kind of how to classify him, but Adiotomiwa Adebawe, I believe. I've got close, probably not close enough, so I apologize. I like to try to pronounce guys' names, and I should have dove on the pronunciation guide more and taken a look in that and did some research. But he's number 99. He's listed as defensive tackle. He's about 280 pounds. Mel Kiper likes him on his big board, and they move him all up and down the defensive line. He'll play right tackle, left tackle, nose, inside. He'll play end, but they try to find him some favorable matchups and move him around because he is by far their best player on the defensive side of the ball. So he is pretty stinking good with what he's able to do and the things that he can bring to the table. So he's their guy. Move him around all defensive line positions. Like I said, very versatile. And so he's the one to watch, especially they'll probably move him inside. If you look at this and think about it, got Dwan Jones and Paris Johnson. They've been pretty good blocking this year out on the perimeter. Where Ohio State has struggled, folks, I mean, it's no mystery. They've struggled a lot inside. Matt Jones has struggled some. I mean, Whippler getting some stuff lined up. And that if there's been some issues, that's where it's ultimately been. So they need to get that thing taken care of and need to get it fixed. And so if you're going to try to expose a guy, you want to try to put your best guys on him because Jones didn't play great against Penn State. And so I guarantee you they'll probably try to work some of those matchups where they feel like he'll be able to get penetration into the backfield and ultimately have success. So number 99, Adebawe, take a look at him. Remember that he is a guy that you should keep an eye on because of everything that he can ultimately do. Who to watch for Ohio State? I'm going to take a look at the running back position. Mayan coming off the knee that he's been bothering him. Trey has a foot issue. Dallin Hayden getting moved up a little bit. Chip Trainum, what he's able to provide. They flipped him over. He's full-time running back now. I wouldn't be surprised if Trey doesn't play a whole lot. If he's dealing with his foot injury, in theory, you should not need him to win this game. You want to see that get healed up and taking some time. My understanding of Mayan, it's more of a structural thing. Like he was able to get back. he's going to be getting stronger as each week goes, and I don't think like rest is going to help him a lot. But you still don't want to be wearing him down in games. You want your running backs to be fresh against the team up north, so hopefully they'll have all the juice they need. So I would expect Mayan to get, a decent chunk of carries early on. Maybe, Trey gets some, maybe he doesn't. Probably very limited use getting him healthy. And I wouldn't be surprised you see a nice little heavy dose of Chip Trainum at some point. He transferred in, was playing linebacker. He's been the emergency running back full time now. He's a fast guy, man. He's got some good speed and he's a thick dude. So he brings an element there that is, it could be pretty interesting to watch. And, guy grew up in, I believe, Akron. He went to Hoban, if I'm not mistaken. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But, coming back from Arizona State, it's a pretty big deal for him to get a chance to tote the rock for the Bucs. So that'd be pretty exciting for him ultimately to see that. I'm going to be watching, some of these young corners. Not that there's the corners that are out there, not that, you're really worried about this Northwestern passing attack, but I don't want to see him give up anything. I don't think Cam Brown is still probably not going to be available, but you start looking at Denzel Burke. It said J.K. Johnson, Jair Brown, Jordan Hancock, who they're talking about is playing good ball. He missed a couple tackles in the back end last week. Lathan Ransom, who hardly misses any tackles. He missed one. Like, you don't want these guys. You want these guys to be perfect because they're better athletes than who they're playing this week. And so you need to treat them as such. I can't sit there and prep you to go against great players because that's not what you're going against, but they should go out there and be able to dominate. So those are kind of the two big position groups I'm looking at. And then also the offensive line, especially the interior of it, as they move Adebayo or Adebayo around. I want to make sure that you're not getting penetration inside. You're not letting one dude beat you up front. Talented guy, but this will be a good test for the interior of that line, depending on where they ultimately move him around. But I would expect him to be inside just based for matchups of where he could be. Keys to victory, number one, really what you're going to want to see, because the keys to victory should just be happening. You want to see Ohio State go out there and dominate in the run game. Should be able to do that. There's no reason or impediment for that not to be the case. So dominating in the run game, that's a big piece of it. Making sure there's no penetration, nothing else going, nothing else happening there. Lock that down. Take care of that. Defensively, I talked about the defensive backs, making sure they're flawless, getting tackles. Talked a lot about the corners. That goes for the kind of safeties as well, the interior guys. Lathan Ransom, Rock in there, and then also and go for those guys inside to be able to handle that. And then, the last piece that I also want to look at and want to see how those guys are doing is I want to see how CJ plays in some of the elements. Going to be some wind, possibly some rain, moving around. Your feet might be sliding in the pocket. Receivers' breaks might not be quite as crisp. See how he ultimately handles it. This isn't a game where you should have to run or any of those things should ultimately be happening. But seeing how he's able to throw the football in elements, because let's be honest, could be cold, could be raining. A lot of things could happen against team up north. Could be a lot of wind. So how will he be able to ultimately respond? I like Ohio State to win this thing. I don't know, low 50s. Let's say 54-3. I would be disappointed if they scored more than 7 or 8. I don't think they should get to double digits. I'd like to see him at 3 or 6. And so that's where I'm going to kind of roll heading into Saturday. So thanks for tuning in to this episode. I appreciate watching the show. Continue to like, subscribe, share with this. Fire out your comments on here. We got the midweek mailbag trying to answer everything up. So I appreciate all of the interaction, and we'll get you with our post-game breakdown coming on Monday. So thank you, and see you soon.